I think we all have a superpower, and it's a matter if you cultivate it, develop it, and kind of lean into whatever that is or could be. And then when you merge that with other superpowers, I think that's the purpose, is our alignment as human beings. And I think tension and misalignment prohibits that, right? It's like working on a team. Everybody has a strength. And if you play to the strength of the team, then that team tends to excel. If you play against that or magnify the weaknesses of the team, then the team fails. So it has been my experience in the workplace that good leaders know how to bring out the best in their talent and also develop their talent, which creates stronger teams.
I just got my black curtain back here, and like the shirt that I'm wearing right now has got like a pattern on it. But sometimes if I wear like just a black shirt, you'll just see my arms and face because it just like blends in. And then the desk is like it's like a dark chocolate. The microphone's black, and it's like I don't know, but it's all I have is just a backdrop.
And you have a nice sleeve. You have a nice sleeve. I saw your sleeve last time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Man, this was a process, man. It goes. I don't know if you can see. It goes all the way up my arm.
All the way. Oh wow.
It's like it's a phoenix up my arm.
Wow. So did you design it or did someone design? Oh, that is beautiful. Did someone design it for you?
So I went to the guy with the idea.
Okay.
And it started out as a half sleeve. It actually started, you can't tell because he did a really good job on it, but originally it stopped like right in here somewhere. And I said, I want a rising phoenix, like coming out of the flames. And so we started with that. That was the shoulder piece, all this. And then I came back and I said, okay, well, I want a knight slaying a dragon, which is like what this is down here. I don't know if you can tell. That's the dragon. The knight is on this side. You can see his cape, his face. He's on a horse somewhere in here. That's the horse's tail right there.
Wow, there's a lot of metaphors in that design. That's beautiful.
Yeah, he did a really good job. But yeah, I mean, they have a story to it. The rising phoenix were reborn out of adversity or overcoming of something. And then the sleeve, I mean the dragon, I've sort of explained this story before, but the dragon is like we all have, like the mythical story is you slay the dragon and you get the treasure. So the meaning behind that is, to me, is that if we face our metaphorical dragons, whatever those might happen to be for us, we get the treasure that the dragon guards. And that might be building a business or a limiting belief or whatever it is. I guess it's subjective to the person, but I think it's I think we're all sort of on our heroes or heroines journey, and that's a visual representation of that, I think.
I agree with that. So it kind of aligns with, I think everybody has a superpower. I think we all have a superpower, and it's a matter if you cultivate it, develop it, and kind of lean into whatever that is or could be. And then when you merge that with other superpowers, I think that's the purpose, is our alignment as human beings. And I think tension and misalignment prohibits that, right? It's like working on a team. Everybody has a strength. And if you play to the strength of the team, then that team tends to excel. If you play against that or magnify the weaknesses of the team, then the team fails. So it has been my experience in the workplace that good leaders know how to bring out the best in their talent and also develop their talent, which creates stronger teams. Because the output of that is those individuals will then carry that on to the next team. And then they'll build a team, right? But they're going to build it from what they know and what they learn.
Right.
That's why I say good leadership matters.
Man, really, I like that. And I think a good leader does sort of, I don't want to say motivate because that's very overused, but I think they inspire people to grow. I think that's what a good leader does. And I think that, to me personally, I think that comes through authenticity and openness and vulnerability. I've said this, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like these days with podcasts and stuff, like we had this last election, we had politicians going on long form podcasts. That was something that never really happened. But I think the reason that was so effective is because people are just craving like authenticity from people that we see as quote unquote leaders or people in power. Like we want to see, something else other than just that side that we always see of them on TV. We want to see who this person is. We're just craving that, I feel like, from leaders. And I think the same thing applies, on the company level.
Oh,
we have jobs
absolutely.
I mean,
when I was researching, the characteristics and the attributes of leaders, what makes them successful, it wasn't a huge aha moment. It was just really, employees want to feel that they can trust.
Yep.
Employees want to feel that they can connect. The authenticity is just so important. And what I found is that it's really hard for people to show up and be who they are, right? And that's what they want to connect to. They want to know that you have a vested interest in their development. They want to know that you are who you say you are, because they're going to build their trust and their relationship on that. And it's even more important. And what I found is, because my dissertation and research was related to servant leadership. And I wanted to learn and understand how a servant leadership environment manifests, and those that pick up those characteristics, are they able to carry them on? And what I found is that not only do they carry them on, but it also shapes them personally. Right. And when I polled and interviewed the staff that was led by these individuals, they spoke a lot about how they transform personally. Now, imagine that you go to work, and this is where you spend most of your time. And not only are you connecting, of course, professionally, and you're there to do a job and, make sure that the workplace thrives and is productive, but also personally, you're productive. Right. And I always say this, and I'm sure your listeners, some will like it and some probably won't, but hopefully they'll like it. But, I truly believe that being a leader, it is a gift. There's an accountability, because you influence and have responsibility for the success and failures of those folks. I've seen horrible leaders that micromanage, that set people up to fail, that undermine them. And it is crippling, absolutely crippling. If I would have worked with some of the folks, that I probably never would be where I am today. However, I've also seen remarkable leadership. And one of the leaders that I work for, Tim Bennett, who I think is just amazing. He's not a loud person. He's very soft-spoken. He's a good listener. But he knew how to take the best in the executives that he led. He was trusted. He was trusted in his authenticity and his truth. And he always worked to the greater good. That's a leader. And you don't have to be perfect in all those lanes, right? However, most people show up to have a good experience. I do believe that people show up to give their best and do their best. For the most part, I truly believe that. It's what happens in the middle.
I had to take a couple notes because I got a couple things I want to ask you about that.
No, here it comes.
Well, no, I didn't want to forget it, but before I do that, I do want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. I usually give the guests.
We just jumped right on it, Cody. I love talking to you. We just jumped right. This happened last time too.
What's crazy, man, is like I'm in that spot, right? So like I'll talk to somebody, I'll be like, man, we're really getting into the good stuff here. But at the same time, I want them to be able to introduce themselves. So like, I don't know, what should I do? Should I just let it go and then like put something in at the end? Like, I don't know. But that's why I wrote it down though, so we can keep up with the flow.
Okay.
Like, yeah. So if you want to just tell us who you are, what you do, and I know we're kind of already diving in, but I got a couple things written down, so we'll dive back into it.
Okay. I'm Dr. Tenia Davis, or just Tenia. I am a chief people officer and executive. I'm an author. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. And a steward of life. And that's probably the best way I can describe it. So, and happy to be here to talk to you today.
Perfect. All right. So we were talking about leaders, and something that really crossed my mind that I want to ask you about. So like, I have a lot of experience working with like big companies, with like their management, landscaping and stuff like that. And then I've also seen other people just through their experience at their jobs, how these huge companies work. Cause I want to say I was blessed with the desire to start a company at a very young age. I started my landscaping company when I was 20.
Wow.
And I knew that I'd never fit into that corporate environment. It wasn't for me. So I saw a little bit of that, but I don't see, like, I know people who are in that space that see it a lot more than I do. So what it's like, my understanding is that, and I guess this maybe happens in small companies too, but like really big companies, there's a lot of like deflecting with the leadership, because a lot of times the leadership, and when I say leadership, I'm talking like mid-level managers, they're like the middleman between the executive leadership and the entry-level person. So they're like a middle person. So, let's say that something sort of trickles down the stream of, the course of the hierarchy. I don't want to call it that, but that's what it is. Something happens, the executive team says something to the mid-level managers. The mid-level managers then deflect and project that onto their team. So what I try to do is, if we have a complaint or something like that, I try to see myself as almost like a filter. Like, I have to relay that message and I have to make sure the work gets corrected or whatever it is, but I don't do it in a way that sometimes it was given to me, if that makes sense.
It does.
So what do you think about that? Like, because I know when you're talking about a huge companies like this, it's probably hard to, I don't even know if you could, I guess that's maybe more of a culture thing within the company.
I mean, where I've seen it at its best, there was a company I worked for where I thought the communication was just masterful, and the intention was always set. And so, if anything came from the EC, there was always this connection to, this is what the business is doing. Here's what we're trying to achieve, and here is what we're now delegating to what you're describing as the mid manager, right? This is what we need for you guys to do. And it was easy for them to take that information and say, okay, team, here's what we're doing, right? Because there was kind of this roadmap and everyone operated from the same playbook. Where I think it gets confusing is when, if the top level is not aligned, and so you have 5 executives and they are not aligned, and then they are distilling that information down to their teams, and they're all delivering it through their filters, then that middle group now probably has 2 or 3 versions of what the messaging is, right? And then that middle leadership group distills it down to their team. And if they're not aligned, you now have 5 or 6 different messages. And that's what creates confusion. And if there's not complete transparency in the communication, then it creates distrust, right? So it is, it is important that there is a clear communication of what the messaging is and what the expectations are, right? What is it that you want people to do with the message? Is it information only? Is it something that is there an action expectation? And what is it that you want people to deliver? So I have found, and where I've seen in organizations that have clear, and back to our authenticity, look, what is it that we're trying to do? If we don't know something, just say you don't know it, right? If we're fixing or, saying, hey, we're shifting direction, this is why we're shifting direction, right? You can't be afraid of the message, especially if you're the leader. You just can't. Yeah. And so you have to own what you know and what you don't know, but also in that, it cannot be ambiguous. When the message isn't, if it's confusing to folks, then they will add in what they know. And that's just normal behavior, right? You got to plug in what you know for it to make sense. So have a clear message from the top. Here's the message. Here's how it connects to the business. People want to know, why are we doing it? And a lot of times in the communication, that part is missing. Why are we doing, or if we're making a change, why are we making a change? What is the expectation in that change? And then how will we measure it? So when you go back and revisit that conversation, you can say, hey guys, we're hitting it out the park, right? We said we wanted to hit 10. We're hitting 9.5. And we expect to hit 10 in 2 more months. Okay, well, that resonates with people. They can see that they're either achieving or not. But when the message is, hey guys, we missed the mark. Well, what was the mark, right? Yeah. And so you want to make sure you create a clear path, and consistency is key. Consistency is key. You can't go in and out of communications.
So what this makes me think of when you say this is that there's a lot of speaking from the top down, but there's not a lot of listening from the bottom up. A lot of people don't listen from the actual people on the, I don't want to say bottom, because that's a, but the entry level people who a lot of times are actually carrying out the mission, doing the technical work to carry out the mission, I feel like a lot of like, I don't feel like they feel heard, in a lot of these environments. And you mentioned something about autonomy earlier. I feel like I offer a lot of autonomy to my team. And it's not just because it's a practical reason, because we're in several different areas at once. I mean, I kind of have to, but also too, you mentioned like micromanaging. Like I've never liked being managed like that, and I can only imagine how another person might feel. Now, I do know that some people need a little bit more direction, maybe, but I don't think that should be a systemic thing. I don't think just micromanaging every single thing should be systemic. But I think if everybody sort of knows what the vision is and sort of believes in that vision, I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to micromanage.
Yeah. And micromanaging tends to come from not knowing how to lead, or where I've seen be afraid of the talent you have. You can't be afraid of talent that you have, and you have to allow people to grow. Yep. And use, it shouldn't be that my voice is the answer, right? Because I'm not going to learn from Cody. And in a work environment, learning goes both ways. And so I can always tell it where people are. I don't care what level you are. If you're the CEO, you are learning something, right? If a leader is at a place where they feel they have nothing else to learn, that's actually hurtful to the organization. Right. And the reason why technology changes fast, processes changes fast, right? And so the business is always evolving. And if you're not evolving or strategically thinking ahead, or even challenging the current structure, then you will become stagnant.
Yep.
Right. And so I think there are leaders that grow teams, and I think there are leaders that cripple a team. And micromanaging is it's just baffling to me. And so I think what happens is, as an organization, we have to think through, where do we place our value, right? Because employees will either coast or they'll engage in. They tend to coast if they feel they don't connect, belong, or if they are not treated fairly. Right?
Yeah. No, I believe that 100%.
They'll engage if they feel they're respected, valued, they belong, right? And there's a vested interest in their development and growth, right? And so I'm always amazed in what you were describing, the bottom up, where there is such a lack of awareness. I think leaders that don't have awareness tend to do the most harm to an organization. Because if I'm always saying, Tenia's the problem, Tenia's the problem, Tenia's the problem, but I'm not looking at what causes the problem.
Right.
Right. And I make an excuse for it. So I'm always curious about turnover, or I'm always curious when employees disengage, or if employees are quiet. Right. Where's the disconnect? Why aren't they engaging in? It could be they're shy, it could be they're introvert, it could be many things, right? But really, what is it is worth exploring, right? I have seen leaders I have worked with some remarkable leaders. I mean, I have been very, very blessed. I have worked with some remarkable leaders. And I worked with one leader that literally, he would start the meeting with, okay, he would say, he wasn't really a touchy-feely guy, but he would say, okay, first 5 minutes, how's everybody doing? I don't need to hear the whole story. But it's, I mean, that's his truth. He's like, look, I'm not really comfortable with this, but I know some people need to get it out. Everybody has a different style, right? For some people, they need for you to ask them that to feel they connect, right? And so he would figure out, he would step outside of his comfort zone,
right,
to figure out how to connect so that he can get the best out of his team. And I think that's what a leader does. You have to quickly assess, where are the strengths on the team? How do I develop the weaknesses? And how do I mobilize this group to work together to execute so that we can meet the objectives of the organization, right?
Yep.
That might mean I need to step out of my comfort zone, right? Instead of forcing that team to work to my style, which is actually the worst thing, I need to get the best out of the collective group, right? That's a different skill. And, in today's workplace, being a leader takes a different skill, because we have so many different complexities in the workplace today, right? And so how Cody likes to work, how Mark likes to work, how Michael likes to, how these different folks like to, some might just want to come in and get the work done. Some might need the interaction, right? Some are individual contributors, some are more on the team. So you got to figure out where people sit and where they play. Yep. And then get the best out of that group that way. And then keep everyone in the loop as you go through, because people need to know this is what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think feedback, my second book is about feedback, because that's where I saw leaders struggle the most. And it really hurts the employee. Yep. Not so much that leader. In the long term, it hurts the leader. But in the moment, it really hurts the employee. If you wait an entire year to give somebody a feedback, no one, I have not met a company that likes performance reviews. Yeah. Not one. Yeah. Wait an entire year. Think about that. Mm-hmm. So back in January, when you worked on that project, and then you're not even listening to the feedback, you're like, January, what happened in January, right? And so anyway, the art of feedback is even more important.
Well, so you mentioned, so we were talking about authenticity, and then we were talking about sort of knowing your talents, knowing your team. Mm-hmm. And this, I don't know, man, I think knowing, so when people hear authenticity, I think what they think of is like, being open or real or whatever, but it's like, I think that's just part of it. I think part of it is like being real with yourself, like knowing what yourself and your weaknesses are. And when you say know the talents of your team, your talents, your strengths and weaknesses is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if this is a real thing or not, but I read a very short story. It was actually attached to a picture about how wolves lead in packs. Mm-hmm. So basically, when a wolf pack is traveling, they have the smartest, strongest at the front so that they can detect danger. They have the weakest, the eldest are somewhere in the middle, and the leader is in the back. Yeah. So that the leader can see. And that's how, not to relate us to wolves or anything, but that's how sort of I like to see leadership is not top to bottom, is front to back. Yeah. And because I feel like we're all on a level sort of playing field, but I also feel like, it's I think a lot of, I don't want to call these people leaders. A lot of bosses maybe want to be at the front because there's this ego thing that's involved. But I feel like the most effective way is to lead from the back, because that you
and
can
self-awareness.
see,
what you're describing is self-awareness. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see sort of where everything is, and you can help somebody if they need to be helped. But knowing your team, man, that's incredible, because I've mentioned this, I think a couple podcasts ago, and this might not be everybody's thing, but there's a Bible verse that says, do not cast pearls before swine.
Right.
And so basically what this means is don't offer something of value to a person or an audience or a place that's not going to understand the value or see the value in it.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I wanted to ask you this earlier too, because when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, we talk about knowing yourself and your own authenticity. I feel like one of my strengths in the right area, excuse me, is challenging or making changes. Now, in the wrong area, that obviously wouldn't be welcomed. It wouldn't be, welcome to go against the grain. But I really had to be aware of myself with that, because if I'm working with my team and I say, okay, if I want to make a change, if I want to make, challenge something and pursue something, that can be really beneficial for us as far as like growth or sales or something like that. However, when it comes to my team, if they're doing something, going back to micromanaging, if they're doing something that maybe I wouldn't do it exactly that way, I have to kind of step back and let that and see how that, like, see that process, because I can't be, I can't be so dedicated to like how I think a thing should be done when this person's personality might do it a completely different way. And I understand that's sort of, some people might see that as risky, but like, I think if you let the person work in a way that is aligned with them, I think that it tends to work out. And it's kind of hard to explain exactly without going into too much depth. I know we got limited time, but it's kind of hard to explain exactly what I mean by that. But I feel like, so for example, some people are very outgoing, very driven people. I feel like those people are going to be best if you give them some sense of autonomy. If you don't micromanage a lot of different things. Now, some people are very analytical. Some people like the analytics. Those people are probably actually going to appreciate the performance reviews to some degree. Some people are more, I feel like, open with their team. They're going to appreciate that team perspective of it, how everybody's doing. I've found that some people like to be led on what I consider like a it's almost like a buddy system. Like they see you as they see the leader as like a friend, a buddy, they whatever. And so there's just different, I feel like there's just different ways that people like to be led. And when you know how that person likes to be led, you can interact with that person in that way. I think that's really when the magic of leadership happens, I feel like.
Yeah. So two things out of that. I do think it's important, at least my experience has shown me that teams that are able to have the collision of conversation, communication, as someone termed it, are able to challenge each other in a more effective way. And you do want to have the constructive challenge, because how do I know that this is the best solution unless we kind of talk it through and we challenge? And there, of course, respectfully and productively, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I've also seen and found is that if an organization does not know how to have constructive conflict, then there's missed opportunities in looking at things differently. Because I have not seen where one person has the answer to everything. Where I've seen the most productive teams is where there is this, I call it, gumbo of ideas. And then you kind of shift through it and say, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, or let's try this, or let's try that. And so if you're in a highly innovative environment, you do need that convergence of ideas, challenging each other constructively and looking at, different ways of doing things. Now, as a leader, if that leader lacks self-awareness, then there could be missed opportunities, right? Because if the leader is not aware of how they insert themselves within the team or allow that team to kind of evolve and develop, then it's a missed opportunity as well. And as you were describing, kind of where I've seen leaders, or especially feedback from employees, is, where the ego comes into play. And this is just more of a pet peeve of mine. I'm always interested, like if I'm talking to you and then you say, well, Tenia, what you meant to say is this. You should reframe it this way. That is the most insulting thing I have. And, and if a person lacks self-awareness, they're totally missing how they're coming across to that person.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. So will that employee be more open to have a conversation? No, they'll shut down. So guess what? There's a missed opportunity. Right. And so to your point, yes, it's even more important for that leader to have self-awareness. I totally agree. And I love that analogy you gave. Leaders should lead from the back. You can have a full view of your team and you have a full view of the landscape. Right. So you know who to say, okay, you need to go a little bit more to the right. You need to go, okay, now the person in the middle, I need to work on you to maybe move a little faster. Or maybe it needs to be a little more organized, right? But it's also having the trust of the team. So when you provide that feedback, they can hear it and they know it's coming from the right place, right? I do think feedback, the cadence of it, the consistency of it is so important. I always start with what you're doing well first, in the truest form, right? Not, oh my God, you're just great, you're wonderful, you're a rock star. No, not that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, listen, on the project, this is what you did well. And this is how it benefited the team. So I'm now connecting the dots so that a person can see, in doing this part of the work well, how it impacts the greater good of the work. However, I never use the word but, because but dismisses everything you just said.
Right. Yep.
However, here's something I would like to work with you on so you can get a little bit stronger. And this is why this will help you. Right. When you tell someone that you want to help them work on something, then that also signals that you're invested in their success. Right. And so leadership today is just not about, some of the, I read this in Wall Street Journal. It's just not about dictating, go do. It's, I want to go with you. And that's a different leadership skill, And so, I'm always curious, especially someone that's been a leader for a very long time. How did they evolve? Because if you show me a leader that has not evolved, they tend to lack self-awareness and they're not really leading.
Right.
Because the conditions of the workplace has changed.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious when I hear folks say, yeah, I did this in 25 and 1999 and this is what, and then but you're not talking about today because the workplace has changed today, right? Yep. You want to get the best out of all folks, right? Not put labels on people, not put them in boxes, not stereotype, and don't approach it with biases, right?
Yeah.
Take the best of whatever vibrato they bring to the team, right? How do you get the best? And so you kind of have to step outside of yourself, because you got to step outside of your own comfort zones, right?
Right.
If I'm an introvert and I'm leading all extroverts, that's a huge adjustment, right? Right? Yep. You got a bunch of screaming people in the room. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I? But you have to step outside of yourself, right? Because how do I get the best out of this group? And how do I assess them fairly? Right?
Yeah.
People go ahead.
It's almost like you're a chameleon, almost, like sometimes, like you have to, it's almost like and this isn't manipulative, although I guess it could be if it's used in the wrong area by the wrong person, but it's like you have to be almost adaptive to like the people that you're, like you mentioned, knowing how you come across. And that's one of the big reasons that I love exploring self-awareness with people, because I feel like I say all the time that I think that self-awareness can alleviate, if not eliminate, a lot of problems that we have. That's in the workplace, in our personal life.
Absolutely.
Because again, going back to like the me, being sort of driven towards a thing or trying to challenge a thing in the right environment, that might be a good thing. But if the person that I'm talking to, if that's coming across as, whatever, too assertive or whatever, that's going to be the opposite effect. So I think you have to be aware of how these things are coming across to the people you're working with. Yeah, it's I don't know, man. It's like you mentioned like a question that you have is what did a leader go through to, how do they evolve? And gosh, that's been I've had this landscaping company for 11 years, and when you said that, it just made me think like, man, it has been a journey. Like I mean, it really has. And I think when I actually, like, for the first couple of years, I didn't really have people that work with me. It would just be by myself. I think I started hiring people around year 5 or 6 and consistently around year 7. It was a little slow start for me. Okay. But yeah, that's just, man. But I'll tell you this, I feel like my interactions with people, with my team, definitely got better once I started really working on myself and being more aware of myself. But yeah, it's we don't have nearly enough time to get into that journey, but it's definitely been a journey.
Listen, sure. And mine as well. I'm always amazed when I hear leaders, when the finger pointing is always in the other direction, and there's no self-reflection of, there's cause and effect, right? If I have a teammate and that teammate checks out, and I'm criticizing them checking out, but not asking the question why they checked out. Right. I'm not owning my role as a leader. Right.
So do you think that, and I'm sure there's a lot of different, questions that could sort of answer, there's a lot of different ways you could ask this question, but do you think one thing that determines whether or not a person is a good leader is how they can retain their team? Is that what it?
No. I mean, I think it's a factor, yes, but it's not. But it's not, because many things happen, right? Sometimes people outgrow their role. Sometimes, employees will feel, this is really not what I want to do.
Right.
And then, yes, it is true. People don't leave their company; they leave their managers, and a lot of that you can tell how they engage. Right. Okay. And in organizations where I've really seen that, like, highlighted, is where the culture becomes one of managing politics versus the actual work, or if there's a higher premium on the socialization of connecting, and connecting is good, but connecting in a way where, oh, I like you, so I promote you. Oh, I like you, so I want to work with you.
Yeah.
I like you because you don't challenge me. Right. That's different. Right. But where I've seen high performing organizations really at its best is one that has a culture of understanding communication, conflict, and really looking at how do you move an organization forward, utilizing the skills you have and also developing the skills, right? Of course, you want people that can work on teams well. Of course, you want to like the people you work with. However, your decision making should not be driven by your biases, and your decision making should not be driven by, whether you like someone, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's different. That's when, and it's interesting. And the reason why I said I don't agree fully with that is because when people leave an organization, in most situations, they will not say it's the leader. Most people don't want to burn a bridge, right? So the company doesn't always get the true response of why people are leaving, or they don't give their full experience when leaving the organization, especially if they report into a higher level of the organization, because most people don't want to burn a bridge.
Right.
Right. It's not in most situations, it's only if someone is just like really angry that they just give you I say, throw up of information. Right. And it's like, where did that come from? Well, that's a good question. Why they hold on to that for so long? They didn't have an outlet to communicate. They didn't feel they had anyone to trust to have a conversation. Right. So, I go back to my original, as leaders, there should be an accountability. Historically, some organizations I've seen where, oh, this person is smart, they bring in a lot of money, so the company will overlook bad behavior, right? Well, the long game, there's a lingering effect to that. Remember, because people model what they see. Right. So if you have a team of 10, guess what they're going to model? They're going to model what the company rewards. Right. And so
that's a good point.
As a company scales, then that becomes the culture, and that is harder to change. And what typically happens is if the CEO seat changes and that has a completely different style, then, typically they'll try to course correct, because it's harder to build on that, because it's really, you're managing the politics of it all. And there's politics in every company. There's politics everywhere.
Right.
However, it's a matter of if the politics interferes with the business growth, interferes with the culture. Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting, but I've seen organizations, I always like to highlight, what companies do well, because we already know what people, what doesn't go right. Right. But I've seen organizations have leaders that are just phenomenal, where they truly have. I worked with one leader, and he truly like every new person that started on his team and within his team, he had 2 layers of leaders reporting into him. They had a team of 10, 12, but he personally met with each person for coffee. He personally put on his calendar 20 minutes. He wanted to know their story. He wanted to know their story first, and then he wanted them to know his story. And that was the best investment of his time, because he said, once he delivers something, like if they have to pivot, he said, business changes. I'm going to have to deliver. I need for this group to trust me, and I need to be able to trust this group. So that was important for him in his leadership style, and it worked for that particular leader. However, he also had a very humbled approach, a very selfless leader. So his characteristics and his leadership style, it filtered down in his team. He had the strongest team. And the little things that he took time to do made the biggest impact. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer for every organization. I'm not saying that. Every company is different. However, for this particular leader, where I actually saw the action and impact, and I followed that, it was a success story at every level.
Yeah, I think if I were in that place, so I can't imagine myself being in a corporate environment like that. But if I were in a place like that, that would absolutely 100% be something that I need, is to be understood and valued and respected and heard, I think, by that leadership team. I mean, that's something like I've had a lot of jobs, not very long, a couple months here and there. I always tell people I'm a much better employer than I was employee. But I also had an excuse too, because I would miss work to work on my landscaping company. I would, not go there so I could do this on the side. Anyway, you talked about burning bridges. I don't know. There's a lot of burned bridges I have. I don't know if I could ever go back to a job. Anyway, but when I'm on the employer side and I'm kind of doing my own thing, I feel like that's my space. That's what I'm really good at. But yeah, man, just being heard, just being valued, just being understood that you, or felt like you're understood by this person. That could really work wonders. I feel like you, and that kind of makes me think about this too. You were talking earlier about sort of taking taking responsibility and accountability for things, even if maybe it's not your fault. Because the reason I say that is that there's sort of a connection between that and the self-awareness as far as my personal story goes. So I had a person one time that this person was not able to come to me and tell me about issues or problems. Like, didn't matter what, we could have a mechanical issue, whatever. Like, I would never know about it until we needed to use the thing and it wouldn't work. And so I said, okay. And this person's role was like something that they really should have been able to come to me and communicate this. I said, okay, this is probably my fault because this person feels that they can't approach me with an issue because of XYZ. Maybe my reaction, maybe I'm going to be irritated, whatever it might be. This person feels they can't approach me. Okay, so how can I change this? Well, and then that sort of led into the self-awareness, I guess, exploration about myself. Like, how do I come across and all this kind of thing. So, and that's just like you were mentioning your, leader's journey. That's just a practical example from my journey about how taking accountability and responsibility for something that maybe isn't your fault, but at the same time, you're probably contributing more to than you think, so I don't know. And there's many different examples you could use for that, that could really apply. But I know you got to get out of here in a couple minutes.
Oh, we still have 10 minutes. Yes.
Yeah. So do you have a website or social media or anything?
Oh, I do. So my website is The Leadership Wise. That's Wise, WISE. And so basically, that's basically having wisdom and leadership. But what's important about the website is I have a blog, and it's a free blog. But I wanted a place where leaders at all levels, or anyone in the workplace or not workplace, but basically where people could go and consume information quickly and know what to do with it.
Right.
I think we're in such a polarized state these days. People aren't talking, and we've lost the art of connecting.
For sure.
And we're, I see this play on a stage, and it's so sad to watch. It's me versus you. I have to be right, and I'm gonna do everything to make you wrong. Versus, we both are right. And so how do we artfully, collectively bring that to the greater good? And so I try to blend all of that in the different blog topics. So I have a blog on the website.
Okay.
I have merchandise on the website. It's all inspirational and affirmations and things like that. I think it's important to, if I can deliver a little bit of that in the world today, that's my jam.
Okay. If you have links for all that, by the way, we can put them in the descriptions.
Oh, okay. I'll text it to you. And then I have an Instagram.
Okay.
And my Instagram is all about leadership development and the love of books and, just being your best self. And I truly believe that we all show up to do good and contribute goodness. I do believe that. I think there's a lot of things that get in the way of that.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to touch on what you just said about being right. Like, you had to be right, I had to be wrong, or vice versa.
Right.
I think, man, so as a leader, I don't think you should strive to be wrong, but I think you definitely need to see where you are wrong, because there's no growth in that. If you can't see that, you can't grow, and then you're, I feel like if you can't see where you're wrong as a leader, I feel like you're in a cycle, basically, which eventually becomes a downhill spiral of like just making wrong decision after wrong decision. And anyway, there's just, I feel like there's no growth in that.
And it also, it can really cripple an organization.
Yeah.
Because what it does, it puts people at odds, because now you're asking people to pick a side.
Right.
And for that behavior to take place, I think that is the worst. That is the worst. And I've seen that, and it's never a good outcome for anyone that has to experience it. And, I go back to Cody, the best leadership that I've seen in my career so far are individuals that just show up to be part of, that are good communicators, that can communicate a vision, direction, that are consistent, right? And that are very comfortable with being wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Because they build the trust fast. They're able to connect in in whatever authentic way. And I do agree with you about authenticity. It's having it's having awareness, right? Which is so important. You know, a title does not mean anything. I've been in companies where the receptionist was really the CEO.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right?
Right.
They know everything. They know everybody. They know where the bones are buried. Right?
Yep.
And they have the most respect. Right? I mean, it's just amazing watching that particular company. But, you know, I really think that in stepping outside of that, you know, yeah, some of the best leaders that I've learned from are leaders that just they know who they are, right? So it was nothing in them to trample, you know, degrade or you know, take or strip from who you are, right? I think that's the worst. You know, someone said, you know, they worked with a leader that had to break them down to build them up. I don't even know what that means. You know, it's like run from a company like that, but run from people like that. But you know, the best leaders I've seen are leaders that were just free. They're just open to their learning, to your learning, and really wanting to do great work together. It's just a different energy. It's just a different engagement, right? And
well, it definitely feels more cooperative versus, you know, coercive almost sometimes. So I know we got to go just real quick. If you could share with us one of the most important lessons you've ever learned. I know we only got a couple minutes here. If you could I guess give us, I don't know, maybe it's so profound that it is something that can fit in this time frame. Usually not, but let's see. What do you think? What's one of the most? I'm sure you got plenty, man. I feel like you're very wise. Person.
You know, I will say this. I don't know if this is the most profound, but it definitely was an experience that I had not seen before. And that is if you are attacked to your core because you don't fit into the environment you're in, don't take it personally in the moment. Think it through and don't match the tenor of emotion with what you're experiencing. Because once you say something, you cannot pull that back.
Right.
Right. And I was in a situation that it just like literally shocked me. And it had nothing to do with it was just a very interesting situation. And I had never been talked to in that particular way. And so I think it's important to, if you're in any particular situation that is uncomfortable, manage your emotion and manage your reaction. Because once it's out there, you cannot dial it back. So I say that to say, know your values and know what you stand for. Because in the toughest situations, that will define you. And so we're in a very contentious environment at this time. You know, there's, you know, it's just, there's so much negativity, and knowing who you are and what you stand for, right, is so important. So that in your response and your reaction, you won't have to say that I was outside of myself. That wasn't me. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's important. It's just really important. And then also too, it kind of goes back to what you said too. You know, just kind of go inward and say, okay, what can I learn from this experience? How can I grow from this experience? Not make it about the situation, but in every situation, good, bad, there's something to learn. And so I chose to take the moment to learn. What can I learn and what can I do differently?
Yep.
Right? I can't change who I am. However, how you engage with folks, how you respond, you have full control over that. And always do it in a way that matches and who you are and what you value.
I love that. I I don't want to say anything to dilute that or put us over our time, so I'm going to end with that. But I really like that. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. I'm gonna let you get out of here so you can. I know you got to go. But I do appreciate your time.
Thank Cody.
Hey guys, I appreciate everybody tuning in today. If you enjoyed this podcast or enjoyed this episode, you can find more at Pure Wisdom Podcast. This is on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Rumble, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple and Google Podcasts. There you can subscribe, like, and share and interact with all of our content. Again, we appreciate it, and we will see you next time.